The results of an investigation of the 2013 Arapahoe High School shooting outlined the school's insufficient attempt to investigate Carl Pearson prior to the shooting. The report also showed a failure to address threats against a faculty member and a poorly done assessment of the perpetrator as a low-level risk. School officials are also being denounced for their hindering of the investigation after the shooting occurred. Todd, you're an investigative reporter by trade. You did a great job with it. When you saw this report, you've seen a lot of damning reports. When you saw this one, what did you think?
Well, my first thought really was, I can't believe we live in a society where our schools go on these zero tolerance policies. We kick out kids for having the rifle that they use in their in the band, right? And we suspend them and send them home. And then this guy actually makes a threat against the teacher, something that ought to be a zero tolerance in my mind. But still, we just let him stay there. The other thing, the cooperation of or lack of cooperation from the school officials, it's sad and depressing when you read this report that there was so little cooperation. When you go back to Columbine and you look at the changes, the way law enforcement reacts on an active shooter situation, right? We don't wait anymore, we just go in. One can only hope that this report now will spur some sort of similar change where we're talking about troubled, maybe mentally disturbed children in our schools and how we react to them proactively on the front side before we ever get to this situation. And I'll wrap it up by going back to, again, my theme of the day. We only know this information because the parents took a bold stand and decided to sue the school. Had that not happened, we may have not known any of this. Again, these are criminal justice records, and I think when you look at all of these cases and you start to take them together, what we're really seeing is we just don't have enough power in the criminal. Keep in mind, the Colorado Criminal Justice Records Act is separate from CORA, and we don't have enough power there.
Eric, as Todd alluded to, this hopefully can get something. This becomes something that other school districts can learn from, like what we learned from Columbine. But is it time for somebody, maybe in the legislature this year, to mandate some universal changes? You see, some counties, I think that Jefferson County actually has somebody who looks at the assessment of kids in crisis, of it's people that are either going to be violent or some criminal background, things like that. Should that be more universal in Colorado?
I'm going to be a skeptic of that, simply because you can have all the good intentions in the world sitting in the Colorado legislature, sitting in those two chambers, and mandate this law and mandate that law. It ultimately comes down to individual judgment. I don't have a lot to add. I think Todd nailed it very well. But there's this disconnect between these zero tolerance policies where second graders and third graders and fifth graders are getting suspended for incredible nothing. Because there's some little plastic gun,
butter
squirt gun, butter knife, whatever, stuff like that. What is lacking in my mind is not more laws, it's more common sense and more just using good human judgment. I thought this report was very damning on two levels. One, what happened before the incident, where this guy clearly had a vendetta against this one teacher, the speech and debate teacher at Arapahoe. And that was dismissed as the threat risk, and a mistake was clearly made where he was a threat and everyone dismissed it. People can make mistakes. A mistake was made in that case. I think what is harder to accept is what happened after the fact, the post-tense of the lack of cooperation, the lack of openness and transparency. And lastly, just to echo Todd, a shout out to the family for forcing this issue, but not only forcing it with a lawsuit, but at least as I understand it, their main motive behind this lawsuit isn't to collect a big check. Mm-hmm. It is to force reform and force transparency, and they have been successful in that regard.
Ben, it seems that everything that I looked at this seemed to revolve around the whole lawsuit angle. The fact that there was actually roadblocks to teachers talking to investigators after the shooting, this is all afterwards, seemed to me a school tightening up so that they're not going to get sued or making sure that they're not going to lose as much in a potential lawsuit. It seems like that would be a room for reform, but maybe I'm crazy. What do you think?
Well, I think any school that has something like that happen is going to be extremely cautious in the aftermath about where their liability is and I'm sure that you're right that there must be some room for reform. I think more importantly, though, are what are we doing to catch these things? We saw the 2 young girls at a neighboring high school who were caught plotting before anything happened, and it'll be interesting to watch as that unfolds, sort of how far along they were. You know, we know that there was a text tip that sort of tipped off the authorities about their plans. You know, I tend to agree here with Eric. This, to me, is less about all the legal wrangling and more about some societal values and decisions that we have to make. You know, these are young people who are clearly suffering in some way or another. There may be some serious mental health issues that are at play. I think that schools have increasingly become equipped to identify these red flags. I think there's no question, and you can see it in how all this plays out, that not all of those networks are connecting. But it's good that we can catch those things. I think what we need to continue to really raise, though, is our level of empathy, and to understand that mental illness is not a choice, and that people are maybe predisposed to having violent tendencies, and we need to flag them and try and give them counseling before anything terrible happens. And I think it's also important that we don't do those things in a punitive way, so that kids who are young are getting tagged and sort of marked as being troublemakers or problematic for the rest of their lives.
Patty Westford also has a proud tradition of investigative reporting. When you saw this report come out, what was your reaction?
Well, Alan Prendergast immediately went after it, who'd spent years chasing after Columbine. And the amazing thing is how little we've learned. We are still waiting to find out some of the secrets of Columbine. We certainly know that both the school and the law enforcement shut down. And if they had been open earlier, let people in, told us more, maybe we would have had lessons that Arapahoe could have followed. Instead, Arapahoe followed exactly the same model, which was shutting up. I know we don't actually have lawyers here at the table.
Yeah.
Governmental immunity does protect these entities in some way. So what is it, a PR mission? They don't want people to find out that they ignored what seemed like very, very real threats against a teacher. So I'm glad for the parents that they were able to hold their feet to the fire to get the investigation done. It's an outrage that it took 2 years.